The city was a mess. Honking cars, crowded sidewalks, and a tiny apartment that felt like a shoebox. I was done. Absolutely, positively, 100% done. I needed space, fresh air, and the sound of something other than sirens. So, I did what any sane person would do, I bought a ranch. Okay, maybe ranch is a bit of an exaggeration. It was more like a very large piece of land with a slightly run-down house on it. But it was mine. All mine. And it was far, far away from the city. The real estate agent had called it a fixer-upper, which, in realtor speak, meant needs a lot of work. But I saw potential. I imagined myself sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade, and watching the sunset. No more traffic jams, no more noisy neighbors, just peace and quiet. The house itself was charmingly rustic. It had a big, creaky porch, a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and windows that let in more drafts than light. But it was solid, and I knew I could make it my own. The land was the best part. Rolling hills, a small creek, and plenty of trees. It was exactly what I needed. A place to breathe. A place to escape. The moving truck arrived a week later, packed with all my belongings. Or, rather, most of my belongings. I had gotten rid of a lot of stuff before leaving the city. Less clutter, less stress, that was my new motto. Unpacking took days. Boxes piled up in every room, and I felt like I was living in a cardboard maze. But slowly, surely, the house started to feel like home. I hung up pictures, arranged furniture, and even managed to get the fireplace working. Evenings were my favorite. I'd sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and listen to the sounds of the country. Crickets chirping, owls hooting, and the occasional coyote howling in the distance. It was a far cry from the city, and I loved it. I started exploring the property, walking the hills, and discovering hidden corners. That's when I found it, the barn. It was tucked away in a grove of trees, almost hidden from view. It was old and weathered, with a rusty roof and faded paint. But it had character. Lots of it. The barn was like a time capsule. The door was heavy and groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior filled with forgotten treasures. Old farm equipment, rusty tools, and stacks of hay bales that looked like they'd been there for decades. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. I coughed, waving my hand in front of my face. It smelled like old wood, dried grass, and a hint of something, animal. Probably mice. Or maybe even a raccoon. I started to explore, carefully stepping over piles of debris. There was an old tractor, its tires flat and its engine covered in cobwebs. A wooden wagon with broken wheels. And a collection of tools I couldn't even identify. In one corner, I found a pile of old blankets and pillows. It looked like someone had been sleeping there. Maybe a farmhand, back in the day. Or perhaps a more recent visitor, seeking shelter from the storm. I imagined the barn in its prime, filled with animals and activity. Farmers milking cows, chickens clucking, and the sound of hammers and saws. It must have been a bustling place, full of life and energy. Now, it was just a silent reminder of a bygone era. But I saw potential. I could fix it up. Turn it into something useful. A workshop, maybe. Or a studio for my art projects. I spent the next few hours cleaning out the barn, hauling out junk and sweeping away dust. It was hard work, but I didn't mind. It felt good to be doing something productive. To be reclaiming this forgotten space. As I worked, I started to notice the details. The hand-hewn beams, the intricate carvings, the sturdy construction. This wasn't just any old barn. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. I realized that this barn wasn't just a building. It was a part of the ranch's history. And I was now responsible for preserving it. I made a mental note to do some research, to find out more about the barn's past. Who built it? What was it used for? What stories did it hold? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, I finally finished cleaning. The barn was still dusty and cluttered, but it was a lot better than it had been. I stood in the doorway, admiring my work. The barn looked beautiful in the fading light, its weathered walls glowing with a warm, golden hue. I smiled. This was going to be a fun project. A chance to connect with the past and create something new. Little did I know, my peaceful restoration project was about to be interrupted. By none other than the dreaded HOA Karen. I was admiring the sunset from my porch, feeling a sense of accomplishment after my barn cleaning efforts, when a car pulled up the long driveway. It was a shiny, black SUV, definitely not the kind of vehicle you usually see on a dirt road. A woman stepped out, and I immediately knew she was trouble. She had that "I'm in charge" kind of aura about her. Perfectly coiffed hair, designer sunglasses, and a crisp, white blazer. This was definitely not a rancher. Behind her, a truck pulled up, filled with workers and construction equipment. My heart sank. She strode towards me, a determined look on her face. "Hello," she said, her voice a little too loud for the peaceful setting. "I'm Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association. We're here to take care of that unsightly structure on your property." I raised an eyebrow. "Unsightly structure? You mean the barn?" "Yes, the barn," she said, as if the word itself was offensive. "We've received several complaints about its condition. It's a safety hazard and an eyesore. We've arranged for a crew to repair the roof and give it a fresh coat of paint." I stared at her in disbelief. Repair the roof? Paint it? Who authorized this? "The HOA, of course," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's our responsibility to maintain the property values in the neighborhood." "But, this is my property," I stammered. "I own the barn. I didn't ask for any repairs." Karen gave me a condescending smile. "Well, technically, you're part of the HOA. And the HOA has the authority to make necessary improvements to common areas and structures that affect the overall appearance of the community." "Common areas?" I repeated, confused. "The barn isn't a common area. It's on my land. Inside my fence." "That may be," Karen said, her voice hardening. "But the barn is visible from the road. And it detracts from the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. We can't have run-down buildings bringing down property values." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but I'm planning on fixing up the barn myself. I don't need your workers or your paint." Karen folded her arms across her chest, her lips pursed. "I'm afraid that's not an option. The repairs have already been scheduled, and the crew is here. We can't just send them away." "Yes, you can," I insisted. "This is my property. You don't have the right to come here and start making changes without my permission." Karen glared at me, her eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that," she said. "I have the HOA bylaws right here in my car. I suggest you read them carefully. You might be surprised to learn what the HOA can and cannot do." She turned and marched back to her SUV, leaving me standing on my porch, seething with anger. This was not how I had imagined my peaceful life in the country. This was war. I couldn't believe this was happening. I ran inside, grabbed my laptop, and started frantically searching for the HOA bylaws online. Karen was probably right. I vaguely remembered signing something about an HOA when I bought the place. But I had assumed it was just for the small cluster of houses near the entrance of the ranch, not the entire sprawling property. The HOA website was a labyrinth of legalese and confusing jargon. I scrolled through endless pages, trying to find something that addressed the issue of outbuildings or property maintenance. Meanwhile, I could hear the workers outside starting to unload their equipment. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air, making my blood boil. They were actually doing it. They were fixing my barn without my permission. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found a section about exterior modifications. It stated that homeowners were required to obtain HOA approval for any significant changes to their property, including painting, landscaping, and construction. Okay, that made sense. But there was also a clause that said the HOA could only enforce these rules on properties within the designated residential area. The designated residential area. That had to be my loophole. I scrolled further, desperately searching for a definition of designated residential area. And then I found it, the area encompassing all properties within a 1-mile radius of the main entrance gate. My ranch house was at least 2 miles from the gate. That meant the HOA rules didn't even apply to me. I jumped up, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. Armed with this new information, I stormed outside, ready to confront Karen and put an end to this ridiculous situation. She was standing near the barn, supervising the workers, her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. "Karen!" I shouted, marching towards her. "I've read the bylaws. And guess what? The HOA rules don't apply to me." She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "The designated residential area," I said, pointing to the entrance gate in the distance. "My house is outside of it. Which means you have no authority to tell me what to do with my barn." Karen's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I pressed my advantage. "I want you to stop this immediately," I said, my voice firm. "Tell your workers to pack up their equipment and leave my property. Now." Karen sputtered, but we've already started." "That's not my problem," I said. "You should have checked the bylaws before you started tearing up my barn." The workers stopped what they were doing and looked at Karen, waiting for instructions. Karen stood there for a moment, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Then, finally, she let out a defeated sigh. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pack it up, everyone. We're leaving." The workers started to gather their tools, and Karen turned and stomped back to her SUV, slamming the door behind her. I watched as they drove away, feeling a surge of relief and satisfaction. I had won. But I knew this was just the beginning. This HOA Karen wasn't going to give up that easily. The next morning, I woke up to a strange sound. A rhythmic thumping that seemed to be coming from the barn. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. And there they were again. Karen and her crew, back at the barn, hammering away like nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. Had she completely ignored what I said yesterday? Was she just going to bulldoze over my objections and do whatever she wanted? I threw on some clothes and stormed outside, ready for another confrontation. "Karen!" I yelled, my voice echoing across the yard. "What are you doing? I told you to leave." She turned to me, a look of fake innocence on her face. "Oh, hello there. I was just making sure the crew was making progress. We're almost finished with the roof repairs." "Finished?" I exclaimed. "You weren't supposed to do anything. I told you the HOA rules don't apply to me." "Well," she said, with a shrug. "I did some more research. And it turns out that while your house may be outside the designated residential area, the land is still subject to HOA regulations." "That's ridiculous," I said. "I own this land. I own the entire ranch. How can the HOA tell me what to do with my own property?" "Because you're a member of the HOA," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And as a member, you're bound by the bylaws." I was starting to feel like I was trapped in some kind of bizarre legal nightmare. "But I never agreed to any of this," I protested. "I bought this ranch because I wanted peace and quiet. I didn't want to be part of some controlling HOA." "Well, you should have read the fine print," she said, with a smug smile. Everyone who buys property in this area automatically becomes a member of the HOA. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling a surge of frustration. This was getting me nowhere. Arguing with Karen was like talking to a brick wall. Fine, I said, taking a deep breath. If you're going to keep insisting that you have the right to fix my barn, then prove it. Show me the documents that say I'm required to follow the HOA rules on my entire property. Karen's smile faltered slightly. Well, I don't have them with me right now, she said. But I can get them for you. I'll bring them over later. No, I said. I want to see them now. I'm not letting you do another thing until you show me the proof. Karen hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Fine, she said. I'll go get them. But don't think this changes anything. She turned and walked back to her SUV, leaving me standing there, seething with anger and confusion. I knew something wasn't right. I had a feeling that Karen was making this up as she went along. But I needed proof. I needed to find the documents that showed I owned the entire ranch, free and clear of any HOA interference. And I needed to find them fast. As Karen drove off, presumably to find these magical documents that proved her authority, I raced back inside. I knew I had a copy of the deed somewhere, but where? I started tearing through boxes, pulling out old files and folders. Birth certificates, tax returns, insurance policies, the detritus of a life lived. But no deed. My anxiety grew with each passing minute. What if Karen was right? What if I was legally bound to follow the HOA rules, even on my entire ranch? The thought was unbearable. I remembered that the real estate agent had given me a large envelope with all the closing documents. I frantically searched for it, finally finding it buried at the bottom of a box labeled Miscellaneous. I ripped open the envelope and dumped the contents onto the table. There it was. The deed. A thick, official-looking document with seals and signatures and legal jargon that made my head spin. I scanned through the pages, looking for anything that mentioned the HOA. Nothing. It just described the property, the boundaries, the acreage, the mineral rights. Everything. But then, at the very end, I found it. A small paragraph in tiny print that I had completely overlooked before. It stated that the property was subject to any and all existing easements, covenants, and restrictions of record. Easements, covenants, and restrictions. What did that even mean? Were those the HOA rules? I grabbed my laptop and started Googling. Easements were rights granted to other parties to use the land for specific purposes, like utility lines or roads. Covenants were agreements that ran with the land, binding future owners to certain obligations. And restrictions were limitations on how the land could be used. So, the deed said my property was subject to these things. But what were they? And where could I find them? I called the real estate agent, hoping she could shed some light on the situation. But she was out of the office. I left a message, begging her to call me back as soon as possible. I was starting to feel desperate. Karen could be back any minute, armed with her own set of documents. I needed to find something, anything, that proved I owned the ranch free and clear. I decided to try the county recorder's office. They kept records of all property transactions in the area. Maybe they had something that could help me. I jumped in my car and sped off, hoping I could get there before Karen returned. The fate of my barn, and my peaceful life in the country, depended on it. The county recorder's office was a small, unassuming building tucked away on a quiet side street. I rushed inside, my heart pounding, and approached the front desk. I need to find some information about my property, I said to the woman behind the counter. I have the deed, but it mentions easements, covenants, and restrictions, and I need to know what those are. The woman, who looked like she had seen it all, nodded calmly. All right, let's take a look. Do you have the property's legal description? I handed her the deed, pointing to the section with the legal description. She typed the information into her computer and then disappeared into a back room filled with filing cabinets. A few minutes later, she returned with a stack of documents. "Here you go," she said. "These are all the recorded easements, covenants, and restrictions that apply to your property." I took the documents and sat down at a nearby table, my hands trembling. I started to read, slowly and carefully, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. Most of the documents were fairly standard, utility easements for power lines and water pipes, that sort of thing. But then I came across something that caught my eye. A document titled Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for the Meadow Creek Ranch Subdivision. Subdivision. My property wasn't part of a subdivision. It was a ranch. A single, large parcel of land. I read on, my eyes widening in disbelief. The document described a plan to develop the entire area into a residential subdivision, with dozens of houses and strict HOA rules. But then, there was a note at the bottom, added much later: this plan was never implemented. The Meadow Creek Ranch subdivision was never created. I kept reading, searching for any mention of the HOA or any restrictions on the use of the land. But there was nothing. The document made it clear that the original plan had been abandoned, and no subdivision had ever been formed. I jumped up, a feeling of elation washing over me. This was it. This was the proof I needed. The deed, combined with this document, showed that I owned the entire ranch, free and clear of any HOA interference. I thanked the woman at the front desk and raced back to my car, clutching the documents tightly in my hand. I couldn't wait to confront Karen and finally put an end to her meddling. This time, I had her cornered. This time, I had the proof. And this time, I was going to win. Big time. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Karen's SUV parked near the barn. She was standing there, talking to the workers, a smug look on her face. I slammed the car door and marched towards her, my heart pounding with righteous anger. "Karen!" I shouted. "I have the documents. And guess what? You were wrong." Karen turned to face me, her smug expression quickly fading as she saw the documents in my hand. "What's that?" she asked, her voice suddenly hesitant. "Proof," I said, holding up the documents. "Proof that I own this entire ranch, free and clear of any HOA interference." I walked right up to her, shoving the documents in her face. "This is the deed," I said, pointing to the legal description. "It clearly states that I own this entire property." Then I held up the other document. "And this is the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for the Meadow Creek Ranch Subdivision. Notice anything missing?" "Oh, right, the subdivision itself. It never happened. Which means your HOA rules don't apply to me." Karen's face turned ashen. She stared at the documents, her eyes darting back and forth, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. But that's impossible," she stammered. "Everyone in this area is part of the HOA." "Not me," I said, with a triumphant grin. "I'm the exception. I own the entire ranch. And you have no right to tell me what to do with my barn." The workers stopped what they were doing and stared at Karen, waiting for her reaction. She stood there for a moment, speechless, her face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Finally, she found her voice. I don't understand," she said. "I was told that everyone in this area was required to follow the HOA rules." "Well, you were misinformed," I said. "Now, I want you and your crew to leave my property. And I don't want to see you here again." Karen's shoulders slumped. She looked defeated, her usual air of confidence completely gone. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll leave." She turned to the workers and gave them a curt nod. They started to pack up their equipment, their faces a mixture of relief and amusement. As they were leaving, one of the workers winked at me and said, "Good for you, ma'am." Someone had to stand up to her. I smiled and nodded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. I had won. I had defeated the HOA Karen. And I had done it with the power of knowledge and the unwavering belief in my own rights. Karen stood there, watching as her crew drove away, her face red with humiliation. I could almost feel sorry for her. Almost. I'm sorry, she said, finally breaking the silence. I didn't realize. That's right, you didn't, I said. You didn't bother to do your research. You just assumed you could come onto my property and do whatever you wanted. Well, you were wrong. I turned and walked back to my house, leaving Karen standing there in the dust, her power and authority completely deflated. I had a barn to restore, and a peaceful life to enjoy. And nothing, not even an HOA Karen, was going to stop me. A few days later, I was working in my garden when I saw Karen's SUV pull up to my house again. I sighed. I thought I had seen the last of her. She got out of the car and walked towards me, her expression subdued. She didn't have that "I'm in charge" aura about her anymore. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her voice soft. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right," I said. "But I don't want any more trouble." "I just wanted to explain," she said. "About the barn. And the HOA." I raised an eyebrow. "Explain what?" "That you were wrong." "I already know that." "Well, yes," she said. "But there's more to it than that. I honestly thought I was doing the right thing." She went on to explain that the HOA had always operated under the assumption that all properties in the area were subject to its rules. But she admitted that she had never actually checked the records to verify this. "I just assumed that because your house was part of the original subdivision plan, the entire ranch was subject to the HOA," she said. "I didn't realize that the subdivision had never been implemented." She also explained that the HOA's main focus was on maintaining the appearance of the main house area, the cluster of houses near the entrance gate. They had never really paid much attention to the outlying properties, like mine. "We just thought that the barn was an eyesore," she said. "And we wanted to improve the property values in the neighborhood." "But you didn't bother to ask me what I wanted," I said. "You just assumed that you knew what was best for me." "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry. I was wrong. I should have done my research. I should have talked to you first." I looked at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. I could tell that she was genuinely remorseful. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Are you going to try to force me to join the HOA?" "No," she said. "Of course not. You're not part of the HOA. You're free to do whatever you want with your property." She paused for a moment, then added, "Although, I do think it would be a good idea to fix up that barn. It really is an eyesore." I couldn't help but smile. Even after everything that had happened, she still couldn't resist trying to meddle. "I'm planning on fixing it up," I said. "But I'm going to do it my way. Not the HOA's way." "All right," she said. "That's fair." She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "I just want you to know that I'm really sorry for all the trouble I caused," she said. "I hope you can forgive me." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "I forgive you," I said. But I'm going to do it my way," I repeated, emphasizing the word "my." "Not the HOA's way." "All right," she said, a hint of her old self creeping back into her voice. "That's fair. But promise me you won't paint it some crazy color, like purple or orange." I laughed. "I promise," I said. "I'm thinking of a nice, rustic red. Maybe with white trim." "That sounds acceptable," she said, with a slight nod of approval. She turned to leave again, but then stopped and looked back at me one more time. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking. That barn would look really great with a new weather vane. Maybe a rooster or a horse." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. Even after all that had happened, Karen couldn't resist offering her unsolicited advice. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, trying to sound polite. "And maybe some flower boxes under the windows," she added. "Geraniums would look lovely." "Karen," I said, my voice firm. "I appreciate your suggestions, but I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to fix up the barn the way I want to fix it up. Without any input from the HOA. She sighed. "All right," she said. "I understand. I'll leave you alone." She finally turned and walked back to her SUV, got in, and drove away. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of relief and amusement. I had finally gotten rid of the HOA Karen. But I knew that she would always be lurking in the back of my mind, ready to offer her unsolicited advice at any moment. I turned and looked at the barn, my heart filled with a sense of determination. It was time to start fixing it up. It was time to turn it into the workshop and hobby space I had always dreamed of. And it was time to do it my way. I spent the next few days planning the restoration project. I researched different types of wood, paint colors, and roofing materials. I sketched out designs for the interior, imagining where I would put my tools, my workbench, and my art supplies. I decided to start with the roof. It was the most urgent repair, and it would protect the barn from the elements. I hired a local contractor to replace the old, rusty roof with a new, sturdy one. The work took several days, but it was worth it. The new roof looked great, and I knew that the barn would be much safer and more secure. Next, I started working on the walls. I patched up the cracks, replaced the rotten boards, and gave the entire barn a fresh coat of paint. I chose a beautiful shade of rustic red, with white trim, just like I had promised Karen. As I worked, I started to feel a sense of connection to the barn. I imagined the people who had built it, the farmers who had used it, and the stories it held. It was more than just a building. It was a part of the ranch's history. And I was now responsible for preserving it. As I worked on the barn, I started to meet my neighbors. They were a friendly bunch, mostly farmers and ranchers who had lived in the area for generations. They were curious about the new city slicker who had bought the old Peterson ranch. One day, a woman named Martha stopped by. She was an elderly woman with a warm smile and twinkling eyes. She told me that she had known the Peterson family for years and that she was happy to see someone finally fixing up the old barn. "That barn has a lot of history," she said. "It was built by Old Man Peterson himself, back in the 1920s. He used to store his hay and his equipment in there." She went on to tell me stories about the Peterson family, their struggles, and their triumphs. I listened intently, fascinated by the history of the ranch. Martha also told me about Karen. "Oh, that Karen," she said, shaking her head. "She means well, but she can be a bit overbearing." She explained that Karen had only moved to the area a few years ago and that she had quickly taken over the HOA. "She's always trying to tell everyone what to do," Martha said. "But most of us just ignore her." I laughed. "I can see that," I said. "I had a little run-in with her myself." Martha chuckled. "I heard about that," she said. "Good for you for standing up to her. Someone had to do it." She offered to help me with the barn restoration, and I gladly accepted. She had a lot of experience with carpentry and painting, and she was a valuable asset. Other neighbors also offered their help. Some brought tools, others brought food, and others just offered their encouragement. It was amazing to see the community come together to support me. As I worked on the barn with my neighbors, I started to feel like I was finally becoming a part of the community. I was no longer just a city slicker who had bought a ranch. I was a neighbor, a friend, and a member of the Meadow Creek community. The barn restoration became more than just a personal project. It became a community project. It was a way for all of us to connect with the past, celebrate the present, and build a better future. And it was a way for me to finally find the peace and quiet I had been searching for. Not just the peace and quiet of the countryside, but the peace and quiet of belonging. The peace and quiet of being home. With the roof repaired and the walls painted, it was time to focus on the interior of the barn. I wanted to create a space that was both functional and inspiring. A place where I could work on my art projects, tinker with my tools, and just relax and enjoy the peace and quiet of the countryside. I started by clearing out the remaining junk. Old farm equipment, rusty tools, and piles of hay bales that had been there for decades. It was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun. I felt like I was uncovering hidden treasures. I found an old workbench that was covered in dust and cobwebs. I cleaned it up, sanded it down, and gave it a fresh coat of varnish. It looked beautiful. I also found a collection of old tools, hammers, saws, wrenches, and pliers. I cleaned them up, sharpened them, and organized them in a tool chest. I felt like I was connecting with the past, using the same tools that the Peterson family had used to build and maintain the ranch. I installed some new windows to let in more light. I hung up some shelves to store my art supplies and my tools. I set up a comfortable chair in the corner, where I could sit and read or just relax. I wanted to make the barn feel like a true extension of my home. A place where I could express my creativity, pursue my hobbies, and escape from the stresses of everyday life. As I worked on the interior, I started to think about what I wanted to use the barn for. I had always loved art, but I had never really had the time or the space to pursue it. Now, I had both. I decided to turn the barn into an art studio. I set up an easel, bought some paints and brushes, and started experimenting with different techniques. I also decided to use the barn as a workshop. I loved tinkering with tools and building things. I set up a workbench, bought some power tools, and started working on various projects. The barn became my sanctuary. A place where I could be myself, express my creativity, and connect with the past. It was a far cry from the tiny apartment I had lived in the city. It was a place where I could breathe, a place where I could escape, and a place where I could finally feel at home. As the barn restoration neared completion, I started to think about Karen. I wondered if she had seen the finished product. I wondered if she approved. I decided to invite her over for a visit. I wanted to show her what I had done with the barn. I wanted to prove to her that I had done it my way, and that it looked beautiful. I called her up and invited her over for coffee. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted. I was nervous as I waited for her to arrive. I didn't know what to expect. Would she be impressed? Would she be critical? Or would she just ignore the whole thing and pretend that nothing had ever happened? When Karen arrived, she seemed nervous too. She kept glancing at the barn, as if she was expecting to see something terrible. I led her inside, and her eyes widened in surprise. She looked around, taking in the freshly painted walls, the new windows, and the neatly organized art supplies and tools. "Wow," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "This is amazing. You've done a wonderful job." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Thank you," I said. "I've put a lot of work into it." She walked over to the workbench and ran her hand across the smooth surface. "This is beautiful," she said. "Did you make this yourself?" "I cleaned it up and varnished it," I said. "It was here when I bought the place." She looked at the easel, with a half-finished painting on it. "Are you an artist?" she asked. "I'm trying to be," I said. "I've always loved art, but I've never really had the time to pursue it." She nodded. "It's important to have hobbies," she said. "Something to relax and unwind." I showed her the rest of the barn, pointing out the different features and explaining how I planned to use the space. She listened intently, asking questions and offering compliments. As we were walking back to the house, she stopped and looked at the barn again. "You know," she said, "I was wrong about this place. I thought it was just an eyesore. But it's so much more than that. It's a part of the ranch's history. And you've done a wonderful job of preserving it." I smiled. Thank you, I said. That means a lot to me. She paused for a moment, then added, I'm still not sure about the red paint though. I think it would have looked better in a more neutral color. I laughed. I know, I said. But I like the red. It reminds me of a classic barn. She shook her head, but she was smiling. Well, she said. It's your barn. You can paint it whatever color you want. We walked back to the house and had coffee on the porch. We talked about the weather, the neighbors, and the upcoming town festival. It was a normal conversation, like we were old friends. As she was leaving, she turned to me and said, I'm glad we had this talk. I feel like I understand you better now. Me too, I said. I'm glad we were able to put our differences aside. She smiled and drove away. I watched her go, feeling a sense of peace and closure. The HOA Karen was gone. And in her place was just Karen, a neighbor, a friend, and a fellow member of the Meadow Creek community. After that, Karen mostly stayed away from my ranch. I would see her occasionally at town events, and we would exchange friendly greetings, but she never again tried to tell me what to do with my property. I think she finally understood that I valued my independence and that I wasn't going to be controlled by the HOA. And I think she respected me for it. I spent my days working in the barn, painting, building, and just enjoying the peace and quiet of the countryside. I made friends with my neighbors, participated in community events, and felt like I had finally found my place in the world. The barn became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape from the stresses of everyday life and reconnect with my creativity. I painted landscapes, built furniture, and even started writing a book. The ranch became my home, a place where I could breathe, a place where I could relax, and a place where I could finally be myself. I learned a lot from my experience with Karen and the HOA. I learned the importance of knowing my property rights and standing up for myself. I learned the value of community and the power of friendship. And I learned that even the most difficult people can change. I also learned that it's important to be open-minded and to give people a second chance. Karen had made a mistake, but she had apologized for it, and she had tried to make amends. I respected her for that. In the end, my experience with the HOA Karen turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront my fears, to stand up for my beliefs, and to connect with my community. And it helped me to create a life that was more fulfilling and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. The ranch was no longer just a place to escape from the city. It was a place to build a new life, a place to connect with others, and a place to find my true self. And it all started with a rundown barn and an HOA Karen who just wanted to improve the property values in the neighborhood. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the most difficult people can teach us the most valuable lessons. I continued to live on the ranch for many years, enjoying the peace and quiet, the beauty of the countryside, and the friendship of my neighbors. And every time I looked at the barn, I was reminded of the importance of standing up for myself, the value of community, and the power of forgiveness. And I was grateful for the experience, even the part with the HOA Karen. The biggest takeaway from this whole experience was definitely the importance of knowing your rights. Before I bought the ranch, I was pretty clueless about property laws and HOAs. I just assumed that everything was taken care of by the real estate agent and the lawyers. But I learned that it's crucial to do your own research, to read the fine print, and to understand what you're signing up for. If I hadn't taken the time to read the HOA bylaws and to search for the deed, I would have been at Karen's mercy. She could have forced me to paint the barn a color I didn't like, or even worse, she could have prevented me from fixing it up at all. Standing up for yourself is also incredibly important. It can be scary to confront someone in authority, especially someone like Karen, who was so confident and assertive. But if you believe that you're right, you have to be willing to speak up and defend your position. I'm not a naturally confrontational person, but I knew that I couldn't let Karen bully me into doing something I didn't want to do. I had to stand my ground and assert my rights. And I'm so glad that I did. Of course, it's also important to be respectful and to listen to other people's perspectives. Karen may have been wrong, but she wasn't malicious. She genuinely believed that she was doing what was best for the community. It's always better to try to find a compromise, if possible. But sometimes, you have to be willing to draw a line in the sand and say, enough is enough. I think that Karen learned a valuable lesson from our experience as well. She learned that it's important to do your research, to listen to other people's opinions, and to respect their property rights. And I think she became a better HOA president as a result. So, if you're ever in a situation where you feel like your rights are being violated, don't be afraid to speak up. Do your research, stand your ground, and fight for what you believe in. You might be surprised at how much power you have. And you might just inspire others to do the same. And remember, even the most difficult people can change. With a little understanding, a little compassion, and a little bit of forgiveness, we can all learn to live together in peace and harmony. Even with an HOA. And even with an HOA Karen. But knowing your rights is the first step toward protecting them. So, read your deed, study your bylaws, and be prepared to stand up for what's yours. Your peace of mind, and your barn, may depend on it. And so, the story ends with a happy ending. The barn, once a dilapidated eyesore, is now a beautiful and functional space, a testament to hard work, creativity, and community spirit. The ranch, once a lonely escape from the city, is now a thriving home, filled with friends, laughter, and a sense of belonging. The sunsets are even more beautiful now, viewed from the porch of a house that truly feels like home. The lemonade tastes sweeter, sipped in the company of good neighbors. And the sounds of the countryside are even more soothing, knowing that peace and quiet have been earned, not just found. The HOA Karen, once a source of stress and conflict, is now just a memory, a reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right and the power of forgiveness. She's a part of the story now, a character who helped to shape the narrator's journey and to make the happy ending even sweeter. The legal documents are safely stored away, but the lessons learned are etched in the heart and mind. The knowledge that property rights are worth fighting for, that community support is invaluable, and that even the most challenging relationships can be transformed. The barn stands as a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that even the most daunting projects can be accomplished with hard work and determination. It's a place to create, to build, to dream, and to escape. A sanctuary from the stresses of the world, a haven of peace and quiet. And the ranch is more than just a piece of property. It's a home, a community, and a legacy. A place to connect with the past, to celebrate the present, and to build a better future. So, if you're ever feeling lost or overwhelmed, remember this story. Remember the rundown barn, the HOA Karen, and the power of knowing your rights. Remember the importance of standing up for what you believe in and the value of community support. And remember that even the most difficult challenges can lead to a happy ending. Because everyone deserves a peaceful haven, a place to call home, and a community to belong to. And sometimes, all it takes is a little bit of courage, a little bit of determination, and a little bit of forgiveness to make that dream a reality. Even if it means facing down an HOA Karen along the way. The end.